Hello, everyone. How are you all today? Good. Doing well?
Yeah.
Glad to hear it. Me too. I went to a picnic yesterday in the rain. It was raining here all day, and we had the picnic anyway. Not only was I completely soaking wet, but my tiny little white dog was completely filthy dirty. She had to have a bath when we came home. Now, who likes the rain? Raise your hand if you like rainy days. Yeah, I do too. In general, I think that's kind of refreshing. One of my favorite things about rainy days is the smell in the air. Did you guys know there's a name for that smell? I think it's a cool word. The name is petrichor, and it's the smell of rain. And what it is it's a mixture of different things in the air, primarily, and in the soil. Primarily, it's the release of gases from the soil into the air caused by rain. Petrichor. Yeah. All right. Anybody have any questions for me today? Anything you want more details about? Mohammed,
Do we have to do the pill bug experiment?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Do we have to do the pill bug experiment?
Do you have to do the pill bug experiment? I don't remember if that one was one that is required or not. Anybody remember? Let me check here and see. You know what? Why don't you send me a message after class and
Okay.
I'll look that up, or remind me if we get to the end and there's time and I'll look it up. I don't want to take time now. Things that are required say required in big bold letters. So usually you can tell if something's, I always think that doing the experiments is better. So do you have to? Probably not. Is it a good idea? Usually we really do learn more when we do those kind of experiments than when we don't. So I think it's a good idea to do it, but you never know. All right, all right, terrific. Let me share my screen with you guys, and I will, as I said, Mohammed, if there's time at the end, I will double check for you. Okay, let me know if you can see that life science. Yes, good, wonderful. All right, so what we are going to do today is a case study about the bees. But today I want to start out with some jokes about arthropod or sorry, invertebrates, mostly arthropods, yeah, but invertebrates in general. So here's the first one. What did one flea say to another? You know how when you're getting ready to go somewhere, you would say, should we walk or take the car? Well, the flea says, should we walk or take the dog? Uh-huh. What was the spider doing on the computer? Searching the web. What is a caterpillar scared of? A dogger pillar. That's a little picture from Alice in Wonderland, the Disney cartoon Alice in Wonderland. And the last one, how do bees brush their hair?
With honeycombs.
Yeah, you got it. With a honeycomb. Very good. All right, before we jump into our case study, I just sent progress reports out last week, and in your progress report, I either commended you for participating in class or I encourage you to participate more. So, why do you think I want you to participate? Why do you think it's a good idea when we participate in class rather than just listening to me drone on and on for an hour? Mohammed.
When you participate in something, it helps you remember better.
It really does help you remember. So, really, you guys are here to learn. This is all about learning. And a big part of learning is making mistakes. So, I know that a lot of you are nervous to talk in class. I am too sometimes when I'm in a group of people I don't really know. But we really know each other now. We've been together for this is our 6th week in class. So, we kind of know each other a little bit. We're all friends, right? Everybody wants everybody else to do well. So nobody is malicious in this group, like, oh, I hope somebody makes a mistake. We're not like that. We're trying to help one another. And part of the a part of the way that we learn is making mistakes. So I always tell students, especially in a science class, we often learn more about the things that we make a mistake with than we do the things that go perfectly, for a couple reasons. So part of learning is making a mistake. And the reasons for that are, number one, when I make a mistake, it shows me that I have a gap somewhere in my knowledge. There's something that I thought I understood that maybe I don't, and I should go back and look. That allows me to focus on the things that I thought I knew, but maybe I don't. And by doing that, I get a deeper understanding of what it is that I'm learning. A bigger reason, though, is when I analyze why I made a mistake, that's what's called critical thinking. So that makes me question things. It makes me come up with alternate solutions. It helps me to become a problem solver. And that's really what science is about. It's really what learning is about. So if you think about it, you guys are going to school right now, and you're going to school to prepare for something. You're going to school ultimately to prepare for a job. Well, odds are pretty good that the job that you get when you're out of school doesn't even exist yet. The world is changing so much that the job that you are preparing for hasn't even been created yet. So what's really way more important than just memorizing a bunch of facts is learning how to think, learning how to learn. And that's what this is all about. That's what this back and forth, this kind of discussion is all about. Also, as Mohammed said, it reinforces your memory. When you learn something, when you make a mistake, and we have discussion about things, it helps us to remember something a little bit better. And it encourages us to think outside the box, to innovate, to explore different things. So I would love to see you guys participate more. I think it's more fun. Probably the biggest reason to help to participate in class is that it's more fun if we all talk. I'm sure you all get tired of just hearing my voice for an hour at a time. So if you hear other voices, it breaks it up a little bit, and that makes it a little bit more fun. All right. Any questions? All right, let's talk about the bees. What's happening to the bees? Now, since about the year 2007, nearly 1/3 of the honeybees in North America, Europe, and South America have died, and we're still not sure why. So 1/3 have died. So how important do you think this is to our lives? Why does it matter? And what do honeybees do anyway? Alistair.
Honeybees pollinate other flowers
Yeah.
and they also are a big source of life to other plants, animals, and
Yep.
they're a huge part in the ecosystem or the chain.
They absolutely are. In fact, take a look at this picture right here. If the bees disappeared, a lot of these fruits and nuts and seeds and vegetables would not be here anymore. This is what a garden looks like with bees. This is what the same garden would look like without that pollination. So they pollinate nearly 1/3 of everything that we eat. So if the bees disappear, these things go with them. And then meat production also goes with them, because if there isn't this kind of food to feed the animals, we don't have enough animals. The animals don't have enough to eat. So if all of this goes down, if the bee population continues to go down, we would be in pretty bad shape indeed. Now, about 1/3 of the honeybee colonies in the US have collapsed and are no longer available. So they call this colony collapse disorder. And you can figure out what that means, right? The colony collapses or ceases to exist. All the bees die off on that. Now, let's talk about what has changed. These three things are thought to be pretty significant. There's been a steady increase in the amount of high fructose corn syrup consumed by honeybees. Raise your hand if you've heard of high fructose corn syrup before. It's not great for bees, not great for people either. But we're gonna focus on bees this time. Also, there's been an increase in the use of pesticides, and varroa mites are a kind of an insect that harms bees. Now, before we go into this case study, we have to remember a couple of things. There's a difference between correlation and causation. Anybody heard that before? Correlation does not equal causation. Well, that means just because you correlate something with something else, that doesn't mean it caused it. Okay, so let's say that, let me think of an example of correlation and causation. Let's say that you notice that whenever you get a really good night's sleep, that you do really well on your exams the next day. Does that necessarily mean that that sleeping caused a good exam? Not necessarily. Probably played a role, but that's a correlation. Maybe the good exam is because you studied hard, because you did a good job preparing for the exam. So the sleeping didn't necessarily cause the good grade, but it's correlated with it. So in this case, you have to remember that the things that we're looking at, the fact that there's been more high fructose corn syrup, the fact that there's an increased use of pesticides, and that there are varroa mites around, those are correlated with this drop in the bees, but it doesn't necessarily mean that one or all of them have caused it. Now, since this all started, scientists and politicians and organizations have tried to figure out what's happening. So what do you guys know about pesticides? What's that word even mean? What is a pesticide? Mohammed.
It's like a spray that basically kills insects.
Yeah, exactly. So pest would be, in this case, an insect or a plant that is doing harm to the field. So a pesticide can be a plant. Usually we use the term herbicide when we're talking about a plant, but pesticides will kill both, different kinds. Now, some think that we're using a lot more pesticides in farming these days, and that's the cause of it. Because, not a big difference between an insect pest and a honeybee as far as the pesticides go. Pesticides are going to kill the bees. So there was a recent study that showed that there's a compound that's commonly used in pesticides, and it can kill bees, and it can hurt their ability to reproduce. Now, the thing about this chemical is it doesn't kill them immediately. It's not like you spray it on them and they instantly die. They die slowly over time. The colony will die slowly over time. And it's especially harmful to the queens of the colonies, meaning the queen isn't going to have as many offspring. So lower reproduction in this colony. Now, remember also, whatever we sprinkle on the ground or spray on the ground, what happens to it when it rains? What happens to that chemical that we've sprayed when it rains? Felicity.
It soaks into the ground and spreads.
And what?
It spreads, like the rain washes it.
Yeah, it soaks into the ground and it moves with the water as the water runs into streams and then creeks and then rivers and then eventually into the ocean. So that chemical can affect a farm that is miles away from the place that it was sprayed as it's carried through the groundwater. Then it can be taken up by the bees when they pollinate those flowers. So picture this spray in the field here. It's in this field. The rain causes it to soak into the ground. It moves to this farm way over here in the distance, and it's taken up by the flowers that are growing there, by the plants that are growing there. Bees come along and they pollinate that, and they get the chemical on and in them. Now, one of the interesting things that they saw with this use of this pesticide, with this study, is that the bees didn't kick out the sick and dead insects as they usually do. Okay, think about that. So when you've got a colony and a bee in that colony gets sick, normally the bees will take that sick bee and they'll throw it out. Why do you think they do that? Sounds kind of mean, doesn't it? Aren't you glad your parents don't do that when you get sick? You're out of here. Yeah, but the bees do. So why? Alistair?
Probably to protect the other bees.
Yeah, exactly. If the sick bees stay in the nest, they could pass that infection on to the other bees. So they kick them out. But when they've been exposed to this pesticide, they don't do that anymore. They keep the sick bees in the hive. And to make matters even worse, when a fungicide is present, so that's a chemical that kills fungus on crops, it only takes half as much of the pesticide to kill the bees. So you understand what that means. A fungicide is often used with the pesticide, and that can really be a problem. Now, these guys are called varroa mites. So this is a kind of a pest that some people think are killing the bees. So here's the mite right here on the honeybee. Here it is a little bit larger, and here it is even larger. So they are called varroa destructors. Good name for them. We can call them varroa mites. They are a parasite that attaches itself to the honeybee. What's a parasite? What does that mean? Felicity.
Something that lives off of another animal.
Yeah, exactly. So it attaches itself to the honeybee and it feeds on it. The way it does that is it actually sucks the fat reserves out of the honeybee. So honeybees have fat. They have fat cells that are filled with fat. And that fat is necessary for them to be able to survive in times when there isn't as much food. So the varroa mite sucks the fat out of them. Now, a significant mite infestation, meaning if there's a lot of mites that get into the colony, that can lead to the death of the entire colony. Okay, so we talked about pesticides. We talked about these varroa mites. We'll talk about corn syrup in just a second. The question is really complex, though, when we think who's to blame. Usually, there isn't just one thing to blame. So we're going to talk in this case study about these different factors and the way they might all be connected with one another. So you got to make sure you're listening because we've got some connections to form here. All right. What do honeybees usually eat? What's their food source? Alistair.
Yeah, probably flowers or the pollen,
Yeah. Yeah.
honey.
So, yeah, go ahead. Oh, are you done? Okay. So yeah, worker bees and drones usually eat pollen and nectar. Now they're going to store extra of that pollen and nectar for times when they can't get to the flowers. So that might be like during the winter months when there just aren't as many flowers, then bees will rely on that stored pollen and nectar. They may also eat the juice of ripe fruits. So sometimes they'll land on a fruit and they will eat that. But in general, they prefer to eat pollen and nectar. Now, what they do after they collect the nectar, the worker bees go back to the hive and they pass that nectar from their mouth into the mouth of another worker. That worker bee now holds that nectar on her tongue until the liquid evaporates, and that's honey. Do you know that's how honey is made? It's nectar from the flowers that is evaporated, has the water removed inside the mouth of a honeybee. Honey is really nutritious. It is rich in vitamins. It's got lots of minerals, lots of nutrients in honey. They store that really nutritious honey in these honeycombs, and it will further evaporate. It concentrates even more. So the water content is reduced. Well, now that process keeps bacteria from forming in the honey. Getting rid of the water keeps the bacteria from forming. So honey is a form that the bees can store for a long, long time without it ever going bad. Honey doesn't ever go bad unless it's contaminated with something else. You can keep honey for 2,000 years and it will never mold. It will never go bad. Pretty important for the bees. Now, another thing that bees get from flowers is that pollen. In addition to the nectar, they get pollen and they get a substance called propolis. So propolis is what they use to make those waxy honeycombs. So the pollen and the propolis together, they're loaded with 3 different kinds of compounds that help the bees to take toxins out of their cells. and it protects them from pesticides, and it protects them from microbes like that varroa mite. Okay, so the pollen and the propolis are really important to keep the bees healthy. You can think of pollen and propolis as being like food for their immune system, food for the part of their body that's going to fight off trouble. Now, this is an apiarist. That's what we call people who keep bees for a living, who like have hives and sell their honey. Well, they will keep hundreds, sometimes even thousands of colonies of honeybees, and they rent their colonies to farmers who need bees to pollinate their crops. But those colonies have to be moved from one place to another as the farmer needs it. How do you think the apiarist might get their bees from a farm in Pennsylvania to a farm in Ohio or a farm in Maine? Say, come on, bees, follow me. Nope. Mohammed.
They have like these jar boxes that they put them in.
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you, Mohammed. You have to speak up.
They have like jar boxes that like have like the honeycombs, and that's where they live basically.
Yeah, they're going to live in these boxes, but how do they move the boxes? Phyllis, Hannah.
Slowly.
Slowly, yeah, slowly. Well, not really slowly. They actually can move them pretty quickly. They move them in big trucks. So they stack up these hives 4 or 5 levels deep on these trailer trucks. And they cover them with nets, and then they ship them hundreds, sometimes even thousands of miles to where their services are needed. So here's the United States. So as an example, suppose there is a colony of honeybees that spends its summer in the Dakotas. Then when it isn't the season anymore for pollination, then those honeybees can be trucked to California. And they'll be in California in the winter to pollinate the almond crop. Then they might be moved to Florida in order to pollinate the citrus crops. And later they will move up to Maine to meet the needs of the berry farmers in Maine. Now, usually on average, the typical commercial bee colony will travel about 5,000 miles every year. And while they're en route, while they're traveling from one farm to another, they have to be fed, right? They don't have access to pollen. They're trapped inside these hives. So they can't get out while they're on the road. Now, before the 1970s, these apiarists, people who transported these bees, would use a concentrated sugar solution in order to feed the bees when they were moving. So they use this real concentrated syrup to feed them. Well, starting in about the mid 1970s, they stopped using sugar and started using high fructose corn syrup. It's cheaper, it's easier to handle than the sugar. It is acidic, meaning it won't ferment as much, and they can store it for a long time without it going bad. Now, they did a lot of testing back in the 1970s, and the testing that they did said high fructose corn syrup doesn't cause any trouble to bees. So even today, this is what they're feeding them. They're feeding them high fructose corn syrup. Now, there are 3 main sugar molecules. So there's glucose. Glucose is what we get mostly from plants. It's what we eat in order to make energy for our bodies. We eat the glucose that's in plants. There's fructose. Fructose is the kind of sugar that you would find in fruits. And then there's galactose. Now, high fructose corn syrup, the way they make it is they use an enzyme that breaks cornstarch. Any of you used cornstarch before? Yeah, cornstarch is often used in cooking. So they have an enzyme that will break cornstarch up into smaller fragments. And then those fragments are treated with another enzyme, and that breaks them into individual glucose molecules. So individual ones of these. Then a third enzyme converts that glucose molecule into fructose. So that's why it's called high fructose corn syrup, because it has a lot of this one sugar in it. The glucose has been converted into fructose. All right, hold on 1 second here. Not working. Okay, I'm not finding it. I have a poll here, but I'm not finding it. All right, well, let me just ask you the question here. So do you guys think that high fructose corn syrup is natural? Thinking about the way it's made, do you think it's natural? What does that word even mean, natural? All right, anybody else? So it really depends on what you mean by natural, because really everything on earth came from something else on earth. So we have to list the criteria that we mean in order for something to be called natural. So in a way, since it came from corn and really corn starch, it could be called natural, but it's been heavily processed. So we could say everything is natural, but not everything has been heavily processed. So let's look at the difference between high fructose corn syrup and regular sugar. So a blend of 45% of that glucose molecule, this one right here, so almost half of the glucose, and then about 55% of that fructose tastes a lot like regular white sugar, but it's high in fructose. Now, one of the problems is high fructose corn syrup has 0 nutrients in it. It's only got sugar in it. It's only an energy source. It doesn't have those vitamins. It doesn't have those minerals. We eat a lot of it. Bees aren't the only ones who are eating a lot. It's used in all of these things right here. It's used in things like soda and candy and salad dressing, even yogurt and juice and bread and cereal and granola bars and ice cream and jelly and, well, everything you can see on here. Now, back in 1970, before high fructose corn syrup was really a big thing, the average person consumed about 3/4 of 1 pound every year in 1970. Look what it is today. Well, what it was in 2018. In 1970, the average person consumed 3/4 of 1 pound. In 2018, the average person consumed 38 pounds. Today, anybody want to take a guess what it is today? Just 8 years later? Mohammed,
Like 50?
more.
100.
150. The average American consumes about 150 pounds per year. That's a lot of high fructose corn syrup. All right, now, here's one of the problems with high fructose corn syrup. When it's heated up to really high temperatures, it can form a compound that's called HMF. And that damages bees by causing ulcers in their gut, in their large intestine. Now, why would high fructose corn syrup be getting hot? Mohammed.
Probably because it's in a closed box and it's
Yeah.
gonna be always hot there.
Yeah, think about these trucks on a hot day carrying these boxes full of bees. That high fructose corn syrup is going to get hot. So look what happens. HMF. We have to know what HMF is, though. Now, HMF damages them by causing ulcers in their gut. Not a good thing. So normally, worker bees live somewhere around 30 days if they're a female and around 40 days if they're males, the drones. Now, studies have shown that when they feed bees this high fructose corn syrup 55 that has been heated up enough that it forms HMF, their survival rate drops to about 20 days. So half their life is little more than half of what it would have been before. Okay, so let's evaluate here. What do we know so far? A couple of things that have come out. Anybody throw out some, like, what we know? What have we learned so far about this case study? Because that's what we have to do sometimes. We have to stop and say, okay, what do I already know? What have I heard? Hannah.
High fructose corn syrup is bad for bees.
Yep, it forms that HMF, which damages their digestive system. Now, remember, we said that they did some studies in the beginning that showed that high fructose corn syrup wasn't bad for bees. Why do you think that study might have shown that it was okay for them? Hannah?
Because they didn't heat it.
Yeah, it probably was not heated up. They didn't have any of that HMF that damages them. Okay, so we know that high fructose corn syrup can damage bees when it's heated up. What else? What else do we know? Mohammed.
It's also bad, like for everybody, I guess.
For
There's
everybody
been a lot
else?
of, well, not really, but like it doesn't have any nutrients in it, so it's not
That's
really
right. It
beneficial.
doesn't have any nutrients, so it's not going to be providing them with some of the nutrients that they need. Remember what those nutrients that are in pollen and propolis do, right? So they're not getting that. What else have we learned? Felicity.
The insane amount of high fructose corn syrup we consume in a year.
Yeah, that is insane, isn't it? It is insane. Yep. All right, so let's go step by step through some of the things that we talked about. We know that mites do damage to bees. Remember that we learned that they suck the fat right out of the bee. All right, we know that HMF that comes from high fructose corn syrup damages the bees. We know that pesticides can damage the bees. It keeps them from throwing the sick ones out, and it shortens their life. We know that fungicide, the things that kill fungus, will make pesticide damage even worse. And we know that the bees' own defenses are weakened because they're not getting the compounds, the pollen and the propolis that they need from the flowers. So these bees are not eating their natural food. They're not eating the pollen, the propolis, the nectar that they usually get. So they don't get those 3 types of compounds that will keep their cells protected. Remember, one of the things that pollen and propolis do is they help to protect them from microbes like those varroa mites. So now, because they're not getting those 3 compounds, they're not getting that protection. So they're now more susceptible to the mites. So those mites can come in and damage a whole colony. They're more susceptible to pesticides because one of the things those 3 compounds do is help them to be protected against the pesticides. And the fungicides make that damage worse. So not only are they not getting the nutrients that they need, also the HMF in that high fructose corn syrup damages their digestive system. So even what food is going through, they're not able to make use of. All right, so what do you guys think should be done? Let's talk about, what some of the things are that we could do for this. Hold on here 1 second. If you were in charge of this whole process, what would you do? Hannah.
Can we feed them honey? Like
Feed them
store-bought
honey?
honey?
Okay. All right, let's take these one at a time and let's think about reasons that would work and reasons that wouldn't. So the reason that it would work is because that's their natural food source. So that's a good thing. Feeding them honey would be helpful. Why might a farmer or an apiarist, somebody who is transporting these bees, why do you think they might not want to feed them honey? Beth.
Sorry, because it's more expensive.
It's a lot more expensive. Next time you're in the grocery store, compare a bottle of honey with a 5-pound bag of sugar, and you'll see, or even like corn syrup, that high fructose corn syrup. It's really expensive to buy honey. So that would be something that would be pretty expensive for them to do. What else could we do?
How about we only ship them 1,000 miles?
Less shipping time? Yeah, maybe. So a thought could be, instead of having just a few of these apiarists around the country and they ship their bees. How about if we have a bunch of smaller ones in the area? So they're just moving them little distances, because once they're there, once they're released in Maine, now they've got access to flowers. It's only while they're on the trucks that they have to find food for them. They're able to find their own once they can get out. So if we just had some smaller farms or smaller apiarists and their, their colonies that they were maintaining, then they wouldn't have to ship them so far. What's a downside to that? Felicity.
Not many people are interested in beekeeping.
There are not as many people as we would need. And those who are, hey, quiet, are making their living shipping the bees. So imagine if this apiarist who is used to going to all these different places and getting the money from Maine and the Dakotas, California and Florida, and maybe a couple of stops on the way, now you say, okay, you can only get your money from Maine. And you've just significantly cut their income. So that's the thing. They might not want to do this because they might not make enough money to be able to survive. What else? Anybody have any other thoughts that we could do? Remember the three big ones. Beth.
Why can't they just use like regular sugar instead of high fructose?
That's a possibility. That worked until the 1970s, didn't it? Till the 1970s, they were using sugar and we weren't seeing this colony collapse disorder. So this steady increase in the amount of high fructose corn syrup came about at just the same time we started seeing the colonies drop. There's one more big one right there. Felicity.
Cut down on the amount of pesticides and fungicides we use.
Yep. So that would help everybody because pesticides are not good for people either. So that, if we could decrease the use of pesticides, then that could help the bees as well. And then, if we could start using something that was giving them, maybe even we could supplement the sugar water that they were drinking, or even the high fructose corn syrup with some pollen and propolis. If we made that available, maybe they would consume that and that would help them to fight off those varroa mites. Now, the good news is we have in the last couple of years begun to see an increase in the bees. Now, we haven't changed this. We haven't changed this. If anything, we're using more pesticides and there's still varroa mites. So why do you think we might be seeing the bee populations go up? There's a couple possible reasons for that. Any guesses? Felicity.
Global warming.
So you think global warming's helping the bees?
Well, it makes the winters less cold so they can breed all year.
That's possible. That is possible. Because we know that, bees they go dormant in the winter time. So maybe they're staying active a little bit longer. Hadn't thought of that one, but that's a possibility. One possibility here is that the bees are adapting. Animals have a way of adapting to things. And that is a big possibility there, that they are developing defenses against the varroa mites or against the pesticides that are separate from the pollen and propolis. Another thing that we do know is happening is that more individuals are keeping bees. More and more people, just ordinary citizens in different towns and communities, are having their own little colony of bees. And that prevents them from having to ship them places. If, you've got 10 people in a town or, in a rural area who have beehives, then you don't have to ship those bees, and those bees are going to be healthier. They're then going to have more healthy offspring. Yeah. So some things are being done to help this problem. We need to make sure we keep it up though, because those bees are really, really important. And this case study shows you the importance of considering a lot of different factors, right? Because it's not just the varroa mites. Varroa mites have been around forever. They've been around as long as honeybees, but they weren't causing the collapse. high fructose corn syrup might not cause a problem if it didn't replace the nutrients that gave them the defenses against the varroa mites and against the pesticides. So you see how all of these are connected together? We have to consider all of them. And sometimes to make a change, we have to change a lot of different things. If the only thing that we did is stop using pesticides, we might still have the same problem. So we've got to consider all of it. All right, anybody have any questions about the bees? I want to talk a little bit about these ways that insects are not just pests. They actually can help us in a lot of ways other than the one that we already know, which is pollination. Of course, here they've got the bee. See how that bee's getting dusted with yellow pollen as it drinks nectar from the flower? So it's drinking the nectar, and when it jumps onto another bee, then some of this pollen is going to land, I'm sorry, when it jumps onto another flower, some of the pollen is going to land on that other flower, and it's going to pollinate that flower. And that pollination then helps the plants to grow. We know about pollination. What other ways do you know that insects are helpful to people? Can anybody think of any? Well, we talked a little bit about honey. How many of you guys like to eat honey? I like honey. And candles are another thing. People will collect honey to eat, and they'll use the wax from the honeycombs for candles. And at first, you know, long ago, humans made beehives from mud or clay. Well, really a long time ago, they just walked around looking for bees and followed the bee to the honey. And that's how they got honey. But when they first started keeping bees, they used mud or clay hives. In the Middle Ages, they kept them in woven baskets that are called steps. Today, they keep them in these wooden baskets. And the honeycomb right there can be, that's a good source of nutrients as well. Another way, now not bees, but another way that we use insects is the silkworm. So you guys had a video about this in one of your lessons. Make sure you watch all those videos. I think they're pretty interesting. So humans first started spinning silk from silkworm cocoons into these fabrics about 4,000 years ago. So we've been using silkworms to make fabric for 4,000 years. Think about all the things that you can buy in the supermarket that are red. Things that you can buy and eat that are red. Things like juices and candy and ice cream and all of these sweet things right here, Jell-O and cake. Anything that is colored red probably comes from a dye made from the cochineal scale insect. So way back, one of the first explorers to America, Hernando Cortez was his name. He reported that people in Mexico were using this red dye made from this cochineal scale. Today, we use it for lots of things. We use it to dye fabric. So they use it to dye yarn and to dye fabric. It's used in cosmetics. If you've ever used lipstick or blush or any kind of pink eyeshadow, anything like that, the color for that probably came from this cochineal scale. Now, interestingly, this is what it looks like. But when they cook it down, you know, when they put them in water, when they're dead and cook them, they get this nice bright color. So cochineal dye. Thank an insect the next time you eat something pink or red. Another thing is called shellac. So shellac is made from a waxy substance that's secreted by the lac scale insect. We had the cochineal scale. Now we have the lac scale. It's called shellac from the lac scale. Now, people have been using shellac for a long time too. What we use it now for, we use it to seal furniture, to polish our floors. Fingernail paint polish is going to have that shellac in it. And some foods and candles. In fact, they will spray shellac onto vegetables to make them stay fresh longer. So if you ever go to the grocery store and you look at a piece of fruit or a vegetable and it's really shiny, that's because it's got a spray of shellac on top of it. That comes from this lac scale insect. We also don't directly use firefly light, but we study firefly light. So since about the 1980s, scientists have been looking at firefly light and figuring out how it works, and then using that in a lot of different research for diseases to help to know what causes different diseases. So there's two chemicals that are found inside the tail of a firefly. There's one called luciferase and one called luciferin, and they light up whenever there's ATP around. Anybody remember what ATP is? What's ATP? It stands for adenosine triphosphate. It's the energy molecule that living things use. So all living things use ATP for their energy. Every animal has ATP in its cells, and more or less constant. It stays about the same amount. Now, in disease cells, the amount of ATP might be abnormal. There might be too much, there might not be enough. So if the chemicals that are in a firefly's tail are injected into those disease cells, they can show changes that help scientists to be able to study them, anything from cancer to muscular dystrophy. Also, a lot of times they'll use instruments that have those chemicals in them in order to tell whether or not food is spoiled or has been contaminated with bacteria. And of course, ladybugs are used for biological controls against aphids. So here you can see a ladybug actually consuming its prey. Another way that we use insects, we don't do this a lot in the United States, might seem disgusting to a lot of us, but insects are an important food source in many places around the world. So crickets and ants and grasshoppers and other insects, they're just kind of normally eaten in places like Latin America, so Central and South America, Africa, Asia. Those are places where they just consume a lot of insects. It's part of their diet. Any of you guys have any of you eaten an insect? How do you feel about it? Yeah, we think it's kind of gross, don't we? But I bet most of you eat shrimp, don't you? No, no. A lot of America, that's a pretty common food in America is shrimp. And there's really not a lot of difference between a shrimp and a cricket, except where they live. All right. So wound care, I'm not going to show you any pictures of this because it's a little too much to look at. But in the past, they used to put fly larvae, maggots, onto wounds in order to prevent or even stop a condition called gangrene. That was where the flesh was so infected that it started to die. Now, maggots only eat dead flesh. So when they would put these maggots on the dead flesh of people, they would clean the wound. They would eat away the dead stuff, leaving the healthy stuff behind. And it prevented infection. Now, there actually are still some hospitals that will use this type of treatment. For the most part, we're using antibiotics now, but there are still some around the world that will use this type of treatment. And another interesting thing is some insects, like this small minnow mayfly right here, and this giant stonefly, and the American salmon fly, their larvae are very sensitive to water pollution. So when we start seeing that their larvae are sick or are dying, we can recognize polluted water, and we can then do something about it before it starts affecting some of the other animals that are a little higher on the food chain, including people. And of course, there's some insects that are well known for being beautiful. Certainly we think of butterflies as being beautiful. Look at the colors and the patterns. And you know, everybody is cheered up when a butterfly flies by them. Insects have been used all throughout history to decorate people. So people make earrings and necklaces and pins and things, as well as just art. All right, we have a few minutes left, so I want to try something new today. We're going to try this new game called Mentimeter. So you're going to need a tablet or a phone, or just open another window on your computer. I'm going to drag this in so you can see it. So I have some questions, and it works kind of like a Kahoot where you will pick an answer. So what you'll do is you will go to Mentimeter.com, and There you go. You will put in, hold on a second. Here we go. This is what it looks like. Whoop. Make that. You'll put in this code 1542 2763. See, I'm not mentimeter.com, menti.com is what you do. menti.com. Menti.com. So this is not a competition. This is just to see how well the group can answer these questions. So you're not competing against each other. You're all working together with this one to come up with the correct answers. All right. So let me present this. Okay, we got one answer already. All right, menti.com 1542 2763. Anybody need me to write that down? 1542 2763. There you go. I sent it to you. All right. So first question is, what does arthropod mean? All right. We've got 5 answers so far. 5 think exoskeleton. 1 thinks jointed leg. 1 thinks jointed arm. Nobody thinks endoskeleton. And a lot of people are thumbs up in it. All right, let's reveal the correct answer. The correct answer is jointed leg. That's what the word arthropod means, jointed leg. All right, I'm gonna hide the correct answer again, and let's go to the next one. I don't know why it's showing the, I'm gonna have to drag them out each time. All right, what kind of skeleton, which all arthropods have, is on the outside of the body? All right, everybody knows this one. Great. The correct answer is exoskeleton. That is the kind that they have. All right, I'm going to see here. This is kind of new to me, so I'm trying to figure out how to use this Mentimeter. Okay. What type of circulatory system, which all arthropods have, has blood that drains directly into body tissues? Okay, we've got one more person to answer. All right, there we go. The correct answer is open circulatory system. Closed is where all the tubes are connected to each other. That's like what we have. We don't have blood just sloshing around inside of us like arthropods do. They have an open circulatory system, and that blood just drains into the body tissues. It comes from the heart and just sloshes around all the different body tissues. Excellent. All right, our next question is, choose all the segments in an arthropod. All right. Just about done. All right, let's reveal the correct answer. Can you guys see the correct answer on your screens? All right, there we go. So let's show the correct answers. It is head, thorax, and abdomen. Limbs and antennae are not segments. They're on there. They have limbs and they have antennae, but the segments are the parts, the 3 different parts. There's the head first, then the thorax, and then the abdomen. Right. Let me. All right, next question. What kind of symmetry do all arthropods have? All arthropods. Remember what symmetry is. Kind of symmetry do they have? There we go. Yep. It is bilateral symmetry. Bilateral symmetry. All right, next question. The legs and wings of an insect attach to which segment? All right, they attach to, you guys are correct, all but one, they attach to the thorax. The thorax. Okay, here we go. I think I got it figured out now. All right, next, the mouth parts and many of the sensory organs of an insect attach to which segment? They attach to the head. You got it. They attach to the head. Next. All insects begin life as what? A pupa, an egg, a caterpillar, or a larva? An egg. I'm going to go faster through these guys. It is an egg. You're right about that. All right, let's do the next one. What is the type of metamorphosis in which the immature insect molts several times before it is transformed into the adult? Ametabolous, incomplete, or complete? All right, correct answer is complete metamorphosis. Complete. All right, we will do one more question, then we got to be done. Insects usually lay their fertilized eggs close to a source of sand, soil, food, or I forgot to put a name on that one. That's supposed to say water for option 4. Sand, soil, food, or water. You got it. It's food. The correct answer is food. They lay it close to a source of food. All right. I got another class starting in a couple minutes, so I got to go. Anybody have any questions? All right. I'll ask you next week what you think of Mentimeter. Daniel, are you raising your hand? I can't tell. No. Okay. All right. Have a terrific week, everyone. It was very good to see you all.
Bye. Thank you.
Totally option 4. Yeah. See you next time. Thanks for
Thank you.